Okay, well, if everybody's ready to get going, I say let's call the meeting to order at 6:32. And do we have any public participants in this meeting?
Yes, so we have a question. They want it to remain anonymous. And the question is, I see there's a 5G tower close to New Tech. Is this safe for the kids? Have there been any studies about all of this technology in our city? And just so that you guys are aware, since this is an agenda item, we are not obligated to answer it, but we can also push it back to the next meeting and add it to the agenda.
Okay, does anybody have any, maybe we can just have a little light perspective here. Does anybody have any perspective on the question, the essential question there? Just any perspective or response?
Well, are you asking for the city, from the Coppell point of view?
Anybody, yeah.
Okay. Jared, I'd appreciate if you have any insight on whose property this tower is on.
So that's where I'm going to go back and talk to Public Works to find out where it is, because I honestly, we got this question this afternoon, did not get a chance to really identify exactly where that's at. It has been a topic that has been in the news associated with some theories. So I was going to see if I could find some a little bit more reliable data to maybe help with that conversation. So I'd like to bring it back at another meeting. We can put it on the agenda to solve that, or answer those questions.
Is there anything we should know, Jared, in terms of board responsibilities, in terms of responding to this question? So what I would say is that we can discuss the topic. Really, it'll be up to the city to provide. You guys can actually hand this off to me and let me handle this directly with the questionnaire. If you'd like, we can also make it a topic of discussion. It's really kind of an open deal. I will tell you, this happens in council meetings quite a bit, where someone will raise a topic of concern. The mayor will simply say, "Thank you for your comment. We don't have to address it here, but we will make sure someone with staff gets a hold of you and addresses your concern." So that is something you can absolutely tell me to do, and I can take care of that. Yeah, because that's an interesting question. Yeah.
Just because of some of the odd, if you do a quick Google search, you'll find some of the weird theories related to 5G and even COVID-19. So it's, anyway.
I
prefer not to go there today, please.
I agree.
I say we leave this one in response for the next meeting, please.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah, I wonder if part of the context of the question is, the public gets a lot of information about 5G in advertising and things like that, and the kind of the general message is it's more powerful, it's better. And I wonder, just to be respectful of the question, I wonder if there's a concern if 5G does something different to the cell tower, if there's a different implementation on the cell tower. So maybe part of the question is, well, I've learned to live with the cell tower, or I've read about it and I've learned to be, not too concerned about it. However, 5G may change something about that cell tower configuration. There may be more devices, more concurrent connections, therefore more radio transmissions to that cell tower. I'm kind of wondering if it maybe part of the question isn't just what about 5G, but if is 5G different from 4G, from LTE, in such a way that now maybe I should be concerned about it. Does that make sense? I'm just kind of wondering if maybe the tact, the approach to answering the question might be differences between 5G
and prior generation cell tower technology, as opposed to just does 5G, cause any kind of health concerns near a school?
Yeah, I understand your point. So I will take it as an action item for me to go kind of do a little bit of homework.
That sounds good. Does anybody on the board feel that we need to have some conversation about it in the next board meeting? Does anybody want to think about that question and then maybe have some conversation about it in the next board meeting? Or would you prefer just, hand it off to Jared and Jared can give us an update in the next board meeting?
I missed the question itself. I think I had some technical difficulty. So if you could go back, what was the question about 5G?
I think you're muted, Tiffany.
Sorry about that. So the citizen submitted a question, and the question is, I see there is a 5G tower close to New Tech. Is this safe for the kids? Have there been any studies about all of this technology in our city?
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm good. Just have Jared do that for now.
Same here.
Jared taking that.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll have Jared follow up with the citizen.
Yes.
Okay.
And then I will relay what I've discussed back at the next meeting.
Cool. Thank you, Jared.
Sure.
Okay. Has everybody had a chance to look at the meeting minutes from the last meeting, and are we ready to approve those meeting minutes?
Move to approve.
Do we have a second?
I second it.
All right, so noted. Meeting minutes are approved from the last.
So
You have to vote.
well,
You have to
yeah,
vote.
we all have to vote.
Sorry about that. Tiffany, I may never get there.
No
Okay.
worries. That's what I'm here for.
Show of hands on approving of the minutes, please. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the next agenda item. We just wanted, Jared, could you give us a quick update on the new board members, please?
Sure. They happen to be on the meeting tonight as a public participant. They've not actually been sworn in yet, but I asked them to come and listen in. Aaron and Kaylin are both new members. They will be sworn in before our next meeting. There's Kaylin. And they will be, like I said, full on active participants in our next meeting. But that's the update. It is a little bit different kind of swearing in process than what you guys went through because of the times. It'll be a distanced swearing in, it will not be as ceremonial in nature. So I apologize to you guys for that. But hello, Aaron. So yeah, we'll be sending documentations back and forth, and then Tiffany will get it executed for Ashley, and that'll be the swearing in process. So it won't be in front of the council on a big council stage. It'll just be a pretty simple process. But the good news is you get to come and start working with us straight away. So yeah. Thanks for being here tonight.
Yes. So they kind of get to audit the class before joining the class.
Yes.
Nice. Well, welcome aboard, you guys. It'll be nice to actually, get to meet you and talk about what the board's accomplished thus far. So I think we had a good 2020, and tonight we're going to focus on setting up for 2021. So welcome to the conversation. Okay. I assume, Jared, that swearing in process will occur before is it January 4, the January 4 meeting?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And then everybody will be on board for that January 1st meeting of 2021 then?
That's correct.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so any questions or anything anybody would like to say about that topic before we move on?
Aaron and Kaylin, you feel free to speak up. You can talk in this. I know you're not truly official, but feel free to say anything you like.
Okay.
All
All
right.
right. So, yep. So let's move on to board business for this evening. And so recall in the last meeting that we talked about our recommendations for the city council presented in October. And we talked about the 6 smart city portfolios or smart portfolios that we defined that fit within our framework. And 2021 is going to be focused on first and foremost, maintain the focus on 2040. So the 20-year planning horizon for the board's effort here. 2021 is going to be, we're going to make sure that we remain focused on our recommendations to city council. And Jared's going to come back and give us an update on that stuff when it makes sense in 2021 per his timeline. And we talked about the assets, the smart city assets, citizen portal, innovation hub, extension to technology strategy, moving to portfolio management. We're going to maintain our focus on moving forward with the planning of those, creation of those assets, after we get feedback from the city, of course. But now that we've gotten to that point, for 2021, we want our focus to go to the portfolios. And we defined 6 portfolios. And our decision in the last meeting was to trial a process, prototype, if you will, a process where we would have a board meeting. And in the board meeting, someone would prepare data for the topic for the portfolio. First, we would have a discussion about that data. And then after the meeting, we would develop a transformation statement. The transformation statement would be our statement of how we felt the city should transform itself in order to prepare for success on that particular portfolio. And then we would have bullet points that would provide milestones between now and 2040. Things like starting in 2025, do this. By the end of 2028, do this, etc. So 3-step process. Someone collect data, have a discussion about that data in the board meeting. Then we all talk about a transformation statement. Then we see if we can come to consensus on the bullets that would make the most sense, what the city should do to transform in that manner to support that portfolio, and in what time frame we think makes sense. So again, we're focused on the what, and our city leaders are focused on the how. So tonight we're going to do a trial for data on the climate action, adaptation, and renewable energy portfolio. And I volunteered to do the data research for that. So let's walk through it. Can everybody see the presentation material? No problems? Okay, so let's go to the next slide, please. So just to as a reminder, if you will, these are our 6 portfolios that we defined. For the new board members listening in, if you haven't already, you're going to get a bunch of material that defines the framework that the board came up with and further information about these 6 portfolios. So hopefully that'll help you guys to get up to speed before the first board meeting of 2021. But what I kind of wanted to talk to everybody about on this slide is just to say that remember that this is a prototype. So if we don't like the way this goes, we can make modifications. But I do think it's useful to read through these bullet points that we associated with each portfolio. That was our best effort at summarizing what board members came up with, what board members said about these portfolios. And what I found was that they were very useful in going out and collecting data. At the same time, I would say that as I was going through and collecting data, there's other ideas. There's a lot of other ideas. So these while these bullet points, while useful, they certainly aren't exhaustive. As we're looking at the data and as we're having the conversation, we can certainly add further articulation to these things. Next slide, please. So this is the climate action portfolio. So you do have to kind of go back and kind of look at the basics. And these charts are from Our World in Data. And you know, again, it is very basic. Climate change is impacting our planet, impacting the North Texas region. And as CO2 emissions continue to rise worldwide, CO2 in the atmosphere gets more and more concentrated, and that causes a rise in our temperatures. That rise in temperature has many impacts, not just average temperature rises, but the melting of the ice caps, acidification of oceans, less biodiversity. There's just weather events that are more severe. As we move through the deck, we'll get to what our local climate scientists predict the impact will be for North Texas. But certainly this is a big deal and is causing quite a bit of concern among government policymakers and within various groups. When I went out to get data to drive these slides, I want to read to you the sources that I went to, because I think some of these sources are, when you choose a portfolio, I think some of these sources will be useful to you as well, because they're general sources for information that could lead you to some good charts and some good information and things that'll help you tell a story about a portfolio. I used Our World in Data. I used Visual Capitalist. I used Center for Data Innovation. And those are all free sources. I also used the World Economic Forum's Strategic Intelligence information. That is a paid subscription. I used Quartz, also a paid subscription. And then MIT Technology Review and The Economist. So this information that's of a general nature that kind of drove, I guess, other questions and other searches for data, I really started from those sources. Okay, next slide, please. We have had some light conversations about the Paris Agreement. It is important to climate change. Obviously, it's the I think it's something like 195 countries that have got together to agree on how to go about addressing climate change. And sort of the key things are that the goal is to limit average global temperature rise to 2 degrees Celsius. And it's a little bit confusing actually, but the Paris Agreement says that no more than 2 degrees Celsius, but an aggressive pursuit to limit to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and that is at the end of the century, so 2100. Most publications will say that without significant change, without countries meeting the pledges of the Paris Agreement, we're likely to go above the 1.5 by 2050. But I have to admit, there's, I think, some controversy on that. Some scientists believe that a feedback loop will speed that process, and it'll be more like between 2040 and 2050. But regardless, this is the goal of the Paris Agreement, is to limit the average global temperature rise to 1.5 and no more than 2 degrees. The U.S., of course, left the Paris Agreement. I think that was, Patrick, that was 2017, wasn't it?
Yes, that was a Trump administration decision.
Yeah. The original U.S. pledge was relatively aggressive, and it was to be met by 2025, whereas most countries' goals were set out to 2030. The Paris Agreement really doesn't enforce that these pledges be met. It just enforces measurement, and it can trigger self-audit. There's some financing things in there. But I think the bottom line is that the pledges do not meet the objective of a 2 degrees Celsius rise or less by the end of the decade. And as of 2018, and really I think it's as the end of 2019, only 7 of the 195 countries that signed up for the Paris Agreement were, quote, within range of their targets. So new targets are being established, but the progress, unfortunately, isn't as good as what you would want. It is expected that the new U.S. administration will rejoin the Paris Agreement and will update the U.S. pledge, and the expectation is that we will move our goals out to 2030. But it's also expected that we will rejoin the Paris Agreement. The pledges were to be reviewed this year, but because of COVID, the next meeting of the parties, if you will, is November 2021 in Glasgow. But the bottom line is, if you want to go out and look at basically what the world is signing up to, the Paris Agreement is the thing to read. And I've got the sources on the left-hand side that I used. This book, The Uninhabitable Earth, is really fascinating. It's a really pessimistic view. If you want an optimistic view, the book The Future Earth by Eric Holthaus, it's actually Holthaus, Holthaus is a really good book. But the bottom line is the Paris Agreement really is a good place to go to look for how the world's organizing to address this. Next slide, please. This is a really cool graphic here. But basically what it shows is that by the end of the century, with our current policies and pledges and the progress we're getting thus far, we're probably somewhere in the range of 2.8 to 3.2 rise. That would still be enough to take us out of the 4 to 4.8, which has some pretty drastic impacts to everybody. But the thing I would focus on here is that as we think about smart city technology to address climate change, it is most believe that it's not just about mitigation, it's also about adaptation. Our city will have to adapt to changes. We can't just go out and think that we're going to mitigate all the effects. We're not. So we do need to talk about how smart city technology can help the city of Coppell by 2040 to also adapt to these changes. And I think that's the important thing to take out of this slide. Okay, next slide, please. So as we kind of break down and we move to city of Coppell level, the next step would be to go from global to the United States, and we certainly are making progress in the United States. Our CO2 emissions are being lowered, and that mostly is coming from conversion of coal-fired power plants, either conversion to natural gas or clean coal with CO2 scrubbers, to some degree also conversion to renewables, but the phasing out of coal, if you will, is the biggest reason why you're seeing those CO2 emissions drop in the United States. Now, of course, this year we've seen some drop because economic activity has declined. We could expect that hopefully in 2021 to go in the other direction. But the United States is making progress. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, Texas is not. This is a source that goes through and looks at CO2 emissions on a state-by-state basis. And unfortunately, Texas is a laggard in this, on this topic. Our CO2 emissions in the state are going up. And we haven't made enough progress on disconnecting our economic growth from fossil fuel consumption. So my takeaway from this is it sort of elevates the importance of city level action. But it also, you might look at it and say, there's a reason for this, and it probably to some degree also says that there's some obstacles to think about between now and 2040 as well. Texas has not been ahead on this particular topic, unfortunately. Next slide, please. If you take a look at the left-hand side there, you see that we have some local climate scientists. And by the way, we have a gentleman in Coppell, Kent Darwin. Does anybody know Kent Darwin? He is a climate action specialist. He goes around the DFW area and talks about it. He's attended Al Gore's education on climate action, and he's a Coppell resident. Kent might be somebody we might want to invite to a future meeting. But we also have some climate scientists from the universities on the left, including University of Texas at Arlington. We've got some interesting studies commissioned by Texas 2036, and UTA did this climate change risk assessment for one of the Council of Governments groups here in North Texas. And there's a lot of data on this. What I did was I read the data and then I summarized it. And what it comes down to is that these are the impacts for North Texas. Temperatures will rise. I don't like hearing that we're going to have more days above 120 degrees starting in 2041. And of course, what that means is that we're going to be inching toward it, probably above 120 as we go toward 2040. So within the time of our mitigation and adaptation planning consideration. It's going to be hotter. Also, our droughts will be longer with some significant reduction in the moisture of the soil in the area. And what that tends to mean is cities have to spend more to improve roads and to maintain the rail track. I guess rail tracks wouldn't be an issue, but certainly to maintain the roads. But we will have longer droughts. So any kind of planning out there for 2040, certainly water usage is going to be an issue. We will have more extreme rain and thunderstorms. The Dallas-Fort Worth area, I think it was UTA published the floodplains for the DFW area, and I looked at the floodplains in Coppell, and they are projected to grow because of more extreme rain events and thunderstorm events. And I believe that you can go out to Texas 2036 and you can look at what the floodplain growth is projected to look like in the future years. But certainly the city's going to have to deal with flooding events that will be more frequent. Summer season's going to be longer, which means the mosquito breeding season's going to be longer. Diseases that are related to that will last longer, and people with asthma are going to have a tougher time for a longer period of time, etc. We talked a little bit about this, but electricity grid demand is expected to increase significantly, and outdoor work will be more and more challenging. So read through these studies if you'd like that I've referenced here, but basically in summary, this is what's inside those studies. These are the impacts to North Texas that will start hitting, that will sort of ramp up to between now and 2040. Next slide, please. So I want to go out and look at the city level and think through, well, okay, well, how are cities responding to this? And what's the smart city kind of context for how cities are responding? And so it's really interesting. The most interesting thing I found was this Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, and the climate reporting approach that they took through these organizations. I think these are nonprofits, CDP and ICLEI. both of those reporting mechanisms report up to the United Nations Climate Change Group, and then that is rolled into reporting that is done whenever the COP meetings occur. So first of all, a lot of the stuff, the data that I got was a recognition that cities are kind of the front line here of climate change because of the urbanization of the globe, if you will. You see all sorts of projections like this. The one I wrote down was by 2050, 70% of the world will live in a city. And of course, COVID may alter that. We may see something different, but I don't think the basics will be altered. A lot of people are going to live in cities. Cities are kind of the front lines here, but at the same time, city government's control over the emissions that are generated within their city limits is fairly insignificant. And a lot of the publications I read, there was a lot of references to this, with some cities controlling as little as 4% of the buildings, vehicles, and businesses that emit greenhouse gases. So this is obviously a significant thing. What I found was that those cities that are attacking, if you will, the problem and using, I'll just say quote for now, smart city technology doing it, they're doing it through data portals, and they're doing it through unified climate data reporting and through these organizations. The cities in Texas that are most active and a member of the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy is San Antonio, Houston, and Austin. And San Antonio, I think, has the best example of use of, quote, smart city and data-driven approaches to addressing climate action. And I listed those things that the city of San Antonio is doing. I did not list out things that are associated with public policy or public-private relationships, at least for now. But they are doing these things. They have a climate dashboard. They're collecting data and they're adding it to the climate dashboard so that citizens can view climate data. They're working with business owners to reduce waste when it comes to electrical usage, for example, in buildings. They're offering retrofits for those buildings, and they work with the business owners so that they can report back. Those business owners can report back over time what they're doing to conserve. They're doing energy benchmarking. So they're doing peer-to-peer comparisons between buildings to see which buildings perform best, and they report that back to those business owners. I don't know if they do that publicly. There's no evidence that they do that publicly on their climate dashboard, but they are doing it. They have policies. They've created a baseline, and they have policies to reduce vehicle miles traversed within the San Antonio city limits. I do not understand those policies because they were not articulated well on their climate website and among the material that they have. But they have developed commuter incentives. They're working on transportation electrification of public charging infrastructure, anti-idling policies, etc. But the key things that they are doing is they collect the data and they have a baseline for vehicle miles within the city limits. And so they're looking at how public transportation can reduce those vehicle miles. And I thought it was really smart to focus on vehicle miles within the city. They're tracking a local energy provider. I think there's a single local energy provider in San Antonio. They're tracking that energy provider to 40% renewable electrical grid by 2040. Does that surprise anybody? I was really surprised that it was so unambitious. Only 40% of the electrical grid they expect to be driven by renewable energy by 2040. Now, maybe that's because of natural gas conversion from coal power plants, perhaps. I don't know. But they are tracking to 40% renewable electrical grid by 2040. And everything they do, they're reporting via this unified reporting system. So I thought that was really interesting. And I thought San Antonio at the city level sort of provide the best example, certainly the best example in Texas. Okay, next slide, please. Let's see. So I just got out where CO2 emissions come from, and it's really clear that 80% of greenhouse gases are from energy use in businesses, residential buildings, and transportation. It's also interesting that cement and cement production, if you take that and you add to energy use in businesses, residential buildings, and transportation, you really have 80% of the problem. Cement production, the cement industry, if it were a country, would be the third largest emitter of CO2 in the world, which is fascinating to me. Third behind China and the US. There are 6 companies that are working to develop materials to replace cement. And so what type of cement Coppell builders use, what kind of cement is used within the city is important between now and 2040. Of these new materials that replace cement, none of them are really, they don't have a lot of market share now. None of them are cost effective. They're just emerging. But sometime between now and 2030, it will matter if Coppell requires use of these cement that's produced by these companies. And Jared, I can get you a list of those companies if you'd like it. Outside of this 80%, the rest really appears to be related to individual behavior, traveling by plane, eating, becoming a vegetarian, etc. So I think in the city of Coppell, if you look at where CO2 emissions come from, now this is a global chart, but I would not expect Coppell to be any different. It really comes from energy use and in transportation, residential buildings, businesses, and from cement production. Any next slide, please. Any questions? Any comments?
Okay, I'm unmuted. I got a bunch.
Okay.
Policy-wise, just a couple of things that have come up in this. One, it's great to talk about changing stuff on building codes, to think about what it does for climate and the rest. Right now, the city governments are kind of at a logjam with this with the legislature, because the legislature passed a law in the last session that made it where basically you couldn't put in place zoning requirements that are any stricter than what state accepted law and building codes are. Now, the legislature has realized they've probably done that in error, and they're probably going to go back and fix it this session, but that's a really touchy issue, and it will be for at least the next 160 days between now and when the legislative session finishes. I just put that out there as a thing to think about, that we need to be a little careful where we go with that, and we're going to have to pay attention to what happens during the state legislative session starting in January. Second, I love the temperature trend data that you showed, because I actually teach an analysis where we actually analyze that data, and I have students analyze it. And I can tell you, I know that trend is going up and is very real. And it's probably good to know that and have that information, because I can see us taking this forward, and we may have some people in the city who are climate change deniers, and they're not going to believe that. And at least I'm willing to put some expertise behind that, given that literally almost that exact data series you put up there is one that I use to teach with at the university. So there's a lot of credence in that. And I appreciate you getting such high quality data. Speaking of high quality data, my next point was you had found data sources for some of your stuff. With my resources from the working at the university at UT Dallas, I can help people out with data as well. I've got lots of access to different data sources and things like that. So as we go through this continuing process of this, if people are looking for specific data or board members are looking for data, I would urge them, reach out to me, because I may know some resources or have access to resources that, I have access to via the university that I'm willing to leverage. Or I can reach out to people I know at UT Dallas that I work with and ask them, for data sources and things like that. So I'm willing to help out with that. On the extreme event thing, I think this is really important. I think you've got to think more local in pointing out those examples, Jeff, which is, how many of us have had hail damaged roofs in the last decade? How many of us have seen the neighborhood flooding that's happened here on the east side of town? I mean, the intersection around the corner from me was flooded for over a week. Couldn't drive my usual way to go to Costco because there was a flooded intersection. I had to go around through the other side of the neighborhood. The city had to bring in pumps to basically pump out all the excess water and put it down through the storm drain system. I mean, we've all seen versions of this. And I think those examples of urban flooding, you've got to go back and remind people, it was only in 2015 when we had a lot of urban flooding around town. And you saw it whether you were just running through Andy Brown Park or whether you were walking through your neighborhood here on the east side of town. And I think you've got to point that out to people, that's all related to this stuff you're talking about. That's not just some aberrant, we had a wet spring. No, that was an excessively wet spring as a result of the kind of extreme events that come from that. The other one was when you were talking about the stuff for San Antonio, and I've been poking around here while you were talking, and I can't answer this right now. I don't know, and Jared, you may know this. Do they have their own municipal electric utility? Do they have their electric utility centralized?
It is centralized. I don't know if it's the city. So for example, like City of Garland has kind of their own power. It's separate from the local government, but it is a government entity tied to the city.
So it's like Denton has.
Right, exactly.
And so that may be part of how they're able to track all those things.
Right.
And that's not really our situation. So it's just something we've got to think about structurally, because it's not something we necessarily can do in the same way that some of these other cities can do. The other is, I get really, really hesitant when you start saying you want to track, or we want to think about emissions in terms of tracking vehicle miles, because I can't tell you how many times I have sat in a restaurant or a parking lot or something over on Denton Tap Road, and I see all these trucks and other stuff just going back and forth that are not residents at all. They're just part of the local commerce traffic that's going to go through. And I don't know how we track that in the same way that you would in other municipalities, because we've just got a lot of through traffic that's literally people trying to get from Louisville to Irving, or they're trying to get from 121 to 635, and then they've got to do a stop in between. So I get that as a metric. I just don't know that it's necessarily the best one for us to think about. Other people may disagree with me, but I'd put those points out there.
Okay, yeah, fantastic, Patrick. Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, Jeff. There's a lot of good statistics. Having worked with some institutional investors globally, the mindset that I've seen is that the cause of climate change is disputable. The fact that the climate changing is indisputable. And so the institutional investors investing billions of dollars in real estate across the globe is the focus on resiliency, which includes reduction of our footprint. But I would prefer for our group, for my vote for our group would be to focus on the fact that climate change exists. Indisputably, it exists. The cause of which is disputable. So let's focus on what we're going to do as a community to be resilient. The floodplain, is directly correlated to land use. Coppell has issued land use I don't know, certificate permits to fill in low-lying areas, thus changing the downstream floodplain. So that, you know, there's many things, and so a resiliency focus, I think, would be more where I would want to put my focus on the smart city. Then is Coppell causing climate change? Maybe not. But are we reacting to the indisputable fact that climate change exists? So that's my 2 cents.
Okay. Thank you for that, Aaron.
Yeah.
So you would say orient toward, if not completely focus on adaptation and how smart city tools, smart city approaches can deliver to the city appropriate adaptation strategy, if you will, as opposed to contributing to mitigation efforts.
Yeah, I think they're being adaptive will also help us to reduce our contribution, but Texas is also one of the most our contribution to wind energy is far and above any other state, but our coal consumption is also there. And so as Coppell, I don't know that we can move that needle one way or the other, but can we encourage more useful uses of energy, but also just being more resilient with how power is delivered, the water consumption, and we had talked one point about being more independent with our water source. And so what does that look like? Does that look like more water towers? Does it look like encouraging more less water consumption at a residential level? That's where I think we can drive that. What is our resiliency because of where we're at? We know that things are changing. How do we become more resilient and absorb those changes?
Good. Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
I mean, I'm going to speak up and just say that I think there's a lot of really good information here. I can tell you that in Coppell, I don't know if you guys know all of the things that we are already doing related to some of, like the idling policies we have in place. We've changed our fleet. We're reducing our fleet from some of the big diesel run engines to different types of vehicles all the way around. We really have a pretty aggressive fleet manager who's done a really good job for us there. We are very conscious of how many miles on a vehicle, so we can track all that data related to what the city owns. But to Patrick's point, being able to track what's happening on Denton Tap for all of the city miles is just going to be a difficult thing for us to do. I don't think there's sensors that are out there that would help us in that regard. So there's a lot of, from Zeroscape for the water consumption to, and again, when you start talking about home efficiency, we start to bleed over into the Ford board stuff because homes will become more efficient. And again, they're going to be tackling some of those questions. So I know that the city, when we like procuring power, we always buy the credits. I think we've talked about this before, the distribution of power grid, like to your point, Aaron, yes, we have lots of wind generation out in the west and even down to the south, but that doesn't actually get delivered to Coppell. So we basically buy the credits because we're still being delivered off of a grid that's run by natural gas. But that's the other reason why our cost for electricity is so low compared to, other states. So there's a lot of things. When we think about this, the Paris Accord, that is an example of a model. So when we start to tackle this information, we are looking to create some type of model in my mind. When Jeff started this, he's, the thought is coming out of this topic, out of this portfolio, we're going to say we'd like to see X by this date. And whatever those examples are, we just kind of have to kind of drill into them a little bit and think about it from a local level and what we have access to and out into 2040. Those are my comments.
Yeah. Thank you, Jared.
Yes.
This is Kaylin. I had a couple things I wrote down while you guys were talking. Jeff, this was really great. If nothing else, I'm glad I joined the meeting just to get to hear your presentation. I thought it was fantastic. So in terms of milestones or actions, I would like to see milestones around education. I think to your point, Aaron, there will be people in Coppell who have questions about this information and may not just accept it as truth, even if we focus on, even if we say that climate change is a known quantity. I know people who will digress from that. So what can we do as a city to increase or expand on education efforts about the realities of climate change? And like, for instance, you brought up flooding. Like I live in a neighborhood where on realtor.com now, 100% of the houses in my neighborhood have a 9 out of 10 rating, which is bad in terms of we will certainly flood in the next, I think it's like 10 or 20 years. So those examples of how Coppell specifically is impacted, I think would be great in those education efforts. And then the other thing and even if that's true about cause being a question, if we're planning out 20 years, it would be great to see some milestones, maybe 10 years out or something that would allow us to pivot if and when causation is more known. Like, let's plan for that reality and what would we do once it is more accepted. And then I'm just curious how we could potentially partner with cities like San Antonio or others who are actively engaged in this work and kind of learning together. And I'd like to see milestones around partnership in that area.
Very nice, great idea. It's Caitlin, right? Caitlin?
Yeah, no T. Mm-hmm.
No T, Caitlin, thank you. Fantastic idea on the pivot.
I know on the manufacturing side of things, that's one thing that makes it very difficult to build in California. You'll have areas where there's just one manufacturer can only use one kind of conformal coating, and that's it. If they have to outsource any other kind of conformal coating, it's more expensive and they're not able to be competitive. So if you're going to look at the manufacturing side of things, just like the cement, the concrete, a lot of those functions, there's still not a lot of alternatives out there on the manufacturing side. So, and if we're wanting to drive manufacturing into this area, that can, depending on what type of manufacturing you're going to bring in, just by nature, it can be dirty. And solar panels are probably one of the worst, and that's why they continue to stay over in China, because they cause a lot of hazard. There's a lot of bad stuff that comes off of the production of that.
Thank you, Nancy.
So TCEQ is also the Texas Environmental Commission. They have a lot of restrictions on cities and the way we operate today as well, that we've been changing our operations over the last 20 years based off their requirements. So that's something to be aware of. I want to say they had some pretty strict reductions in energy consumption for facilities. Specifically, that was early 2000s when some of that was really going big. But anyway.
That's TEC, Jared?
Yeah, I can. So one of the things I was going to point out, we have that SharePoint site. We can put, if you'll send all of these references that we've kind of talked about to Tiffany, we'll make sure we get them posted out there, and then we'll have a single destination for everybody to go to get these references.
Sounds good.
So I'll put that one out there.
Thanks, Jared. Anything else that anybody wants to bring up?
I have one thing. Did we, I was going back on the slides again. Did we cover the waste management part in this? Because I know Aaron mentioned about water management. How about waste management? Do we?
I think Moshel, I think we included that in the resource management portfolio.
Okay.
Okay, anything else? I think we got a great start to the conversation. This last slide, I'm not going to go through it. I just want to make the point that I think, and especially with the conversation that we've had here, there's a number of ways that we can go when it comes to transformational opportunities. I think if we could sort of, maybe in the next meeting, we'll have a little bit of light review of what we've talked about here, just maybe 3 or 4 minutes of it. But I think if we can kind of hold that and then have that conversation about the transformational opportunities to start off our year, I think that'd be the right way to do it. Again, remember what we wanted to do was have some data presented, have some conversation about that, and then take a crack at that transformational statement in those bullet items for milestones after having this conversation. So I think we've got a good start to it. I do think that as we think it through, it's really good to have an open conversation, talk about anything. We also have to think it through in the context of a smart city, though, which means as we have that conversation, how does data collection, how does creating benchmarks, how does using, quote, smart tools or smart city technology, how do those things help the city to address these concerns in terms of adaptation to climate change. So just another thing to think about there. Okay, very good, and right on time. If we can move to the next, does anybody else have any thing to bring up on that topic? If we can move to the next bullet item, we wanted to just have some discussion about any adjustments to this process. Because I thought as we went through it, there might be some things that we learned from it. We want to talk about the process that we're going to use in 2021. That's our next agenda item. So that what that means is we're each, as we talked about in the last meeting, we're each going to take one of these portfolios and be a primary storyteller, if you will. Collect data, be the storyteller. We're going to have a secondary for each portfolio to help with that storytelling. And I would have to say that looking through the data, and I probably had 30 slides I could have produced. I had 30 charts. I had 40 charts probably. But I called it down to these because I thought it got to the points most quickly. I will say that it took me 8 to 10 hours. It took a bit of time. Now, 8 to 10 hours over a span of a month, maybe maybe that's okay. But I would say that it did take some time to do that. And I don't, what's everybody think about that? Would everybody be okay with spending 8 to 10 hours? I didn't start at the beginning of the day, I think let's just call it 9 hours. I didn't spend 9 hours on it and I was done at the end of the day. I sat down 2 hours here, 2 hours there, but I added it all up and it did take a bit of time. Does that sound like too much? Now remember, it's one portfolio, it's one meeting. If you choose a portfolio in the process and you're not up till March, it's maybe 8 or so hours between January 1 and March, so it's not too bad. But does anybody have any concerns over that amount of time? No issues with that? Okay, good. One other thing that I wanted to bring up is I would say when you take a portfolio, if you know an expert that you can invite to a board meeting that would present data to us to drive our subsequent conversation, I would encourage that. Rather than do that 8 to 10 hours, if you will, pick somebody to come to the board meeting and do it for you. In doing the research on this, I ran across Kent Darwin's name. I've never met Kent Darwin. I don't know Kent Darwin. I just ran across him, and he is somebody that he's a Coppell resident. We can invite him here. But also Arne Winguth, climate scientist at University of Texas at Arlington, and just a couple of others. So I guess bottom line is that the only lesson learned I really wanted to bring up is kind of learned a lesson about the time that it takes. And I wanted to make sure that wasn't off-putting for any of the board members. And I just also wanted to say that in going through the process, I did run across some local experts. And if anybody wants to invite a local expert to do that presentation, maybe over 45 minutes or to an hour, that's perfectly fine. I would even say it's encouraged. And what I'll do is I'll take these notes and prepare to facilitate a conversation about the transformation statement and the bullets in the next meeting. Okay, before we move on to the 2021 process, anybody have anything else to comment on? Okay, good. Okay. Jared, could we bring up the presentation on the 2021 process? Okay, let's see. Next slide, please. Okay, so we came up with a process for 2021. We're going to kick it off on January 4. That's the first meeting of the year. Next slide,
All right,
please.
Jeff, I got a quick question there. Who's the we?
Sorry?
We is not the whole board. So this whole set of presentation got put together by someone. Who's we? That's what I'm trying to understand here.
Who pulled the presentation together?
Yeah, who's the we who did this whole presentation?
I pulled the presentation together, but the content itself is created off of conversations by the board. Is that what you're asking, Patrick?
Well, you've got a whole agenda set out that goes through July here, and we've not had any agenda conversation that would carry out through July. So that's why I'm wondering who the we is. That's why I'm asking.
I got it. Okay. I think the key word is tentative. What I did, thank you. I get what you're saying, Patrick.
Thank you.
What I did, what I did was I put a process together as a tentative process that we could all talk about tonight, rather than just start from scratch. So yes, you're right. We all need to talk through this and see if it's how we want to go about doing business. Yes. So what I wanted to do is just remind everybody, we have our smart city framework that we developed. Next slide, please. We have our recommendations that we presented in October to City Council. Next slide, please. And I believe we did talk about these objectives. We talked about in the last meeting getting feedback from city leaders on the foundational recommendations. We talked about, Patrick, I think you brought up the fact that we really need to be, have a more intimate, certainly more intense communication with the public and get input from the public on what we're working on here. We haven't had that yet. And so I believe what we talked about in the last meeting was to work toward that and try to make sure that we get some kind of public presentation completed by the end of July of next year. I believe we talked about the fact that we would need to be in a position where we can provide input to the 2022 budget development process. That would be presumably somewhere in July. And then this is something we did not talk about. It is a assumption that I'm making, but I'm assuming that we would update the city council again in October of 2021, if not before, but certainly we want to do it in October of 2021. And I just want to paint the picture that the idea would be that our portfolios would be fully articulated by that time, by October of 2021. So what I'm recommending, presenting or throwing out there as the right thing to do is we need to focus ourselves on these portfolios and fully articulating these portfolios. And I think that's going to take some time to do. I want it to be done by October, certainly. But I think we need to do that, try to hit that by July so that we can get public input on fully articulated portfolios. You're right, Patrick. I'm suggesting that. Does anyone have an issue with that? Does anyone feel that that's too aggressive or not aggressive enough? Or sound about right?
I think it's a great plan for December. I don't know that we'll pull it off.
Yeah, fair enough.
That's just, sorry, it's the COVID speak. I get it as a plan, but I think we need to be realistic. All right, it's worth putting out there as a plan, but realize we may have to adapt. We may end up with like we had happen where we had meetings canceled, or we schedule something and something comes up and we can't get a quorum, or something happens like that because people are sick or there's something else going on. I get setting an agenda definitely needs to be done. I think we just need to realize we're going to have to be flexible with it.
Got it. Absolutely.
The other thing that I'll throw out is it is aggressive, and which everything we've done in this board has been aggressive so far. So, I will tell you that the council was blown away with how much work that already has been accomplished. So it is aggressive. The thing that I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to talk about each one of these portfolios. And if we're really going to, vet them and come to some really good, a good place with each one of them, I wouldn't want to just limit it to just the one meeting and then we're done. And hope that we got it all, So just keep that in mind. I think we could carry over two meetings on a single portfolio.
Yeah, I think we should skip ahead because out of this trial, I got to the same place. I put this process together to present to everybody and get thoughts on it. But after putting the data together and the story, and then going through the conversation tonight, I got to the same place, Jared. So if we could skip ahead, let's see. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, that's good. Next slide. So to Jared and Patrick's point, and I think maybe everybody probably sees this. Yeah, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, we really need probably to focus that next meeting on the climate action portfolio and just get to the bottom of that conversation. I think we're going to have a significant conversation, particularly with Aaron's suggestion that we focus on adaptation, at least in the early stages of this. I think we probably need to focus that January 4th meeting purely on climate action. And if we can get to a point on January 4 where I feel like what Jared and Todd and I would be doing after the meeting is just making sure that the board's decisions were documented well so that that could be fed back and everybody have a crack at that. I think if we get to that point for January 4th, we're doing well. And I'm not so sure. I kind of put at the end of this process here some kind of means test, some way to go through these portfolios with experts. And I'm not so sure we shouldn't just do that on a portfolio by portfolio basis. So I guess what I'm saying to respond to everyone's comments here is that I think probably this is too aggressive. I don't think it lends itself to enough in-depth conversations about these portfolios. I think it needs to be extended out. And I think I would be accurate in saying to you guys, I think I'd be accurate in kind of summarizing that I think probably everybody in here probably feels the same way. Is that right? So I think what I'm going to do is kind of reassess this. I do think it's good to have a tentative schedule. So I think I'll reassess it, put it together differently, and feed it back to the board. Does everybody agree with that?
So this is what we call in the parlance, Jeff, hearing no objection.
Yeah.
Clearly no objection. Yeah.
Hearing no objection, everyone will go along with your recommendation. That's the way this works.
You bet. Okay. So I'm going to do that and feed it back. I would like to go to the last slide in this deck. Next slide. We talked about in last meeting getting primaries and secondaries on all these portfolios. This is where we're at so far. So we really need board members to kind of express their interest and get these volunteers set up. I wouldn't want anyone to, it would work best if everybody knew the portfolio that they were going to do the data collection on well in advance of the meeting where we talk about that portfolio.
I'll take connected homes. I mean, nobody took the number 5 is the primary, right?
Moshil?
Yeah, number 5. And number 4 is the secondary.
Thank you.
I can probably reach out to some people on not so much the robotic workforce part. That to me is not. I know, Jeff, you had a lot of opinions about that when we talked about before. The idea of automated city services, though, I probably can talk to some people I know who do a lot of teaching to city managers and city government people. But that doesn't speak to the robotic part.
That would get us started, Patrick.
Okay, let me put me down on that one. Let me reach out. I know some people who interact a lot with city managers, and I can talk with them.
Kaylin also offered up to be on number 4.
Yeah, so I think Moshiel, I think you had said you would be second on number 4.
Right.
Anything related to analytics or like digital transformation, since I work for a software company that does this, I may know some people customers or coworkers, I myself can help do things, I'd be happy to be a second on 1 or 4.
Okay, and who is that speaking, please?
Kaylin?
Caitlin?
Yeah, I'd just be happy to assist whoever takes that.
So Caitlin, make sure I get this right. I don't think there's any problem having a couple of secondaries. So secondary on number 4, did you say secondary on number 1?
Either one, wherever I could help, I'd be happy to help.
Either one, got it, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, anybody else? That gets us filled out a little bit better. What we can do is sort of revisit this at the January 4 meeting. And at least everyone will know that we won't need any further data collection for the January 4 meeting. And nobody will have to complete data collection any earlier than that February meeting. At least everybody will know that. Okay.
Well, with
any other,
just to clarify what you said there, I want to make sure. So if there's anybody that wants to do any additional work related to climate, based off the resources we just shared, I think it would be okay for anybody to actually pursue that, so we can come to the next meeting prepared with any additional information you've gathered to kind of vet that out some more.
Yeah.
But as far as the one you've selected outside of it, so 1, 3, 5, 4, and 6, you don't have to come prepared in January 4th, prepared to make that presentation.
Right.
Okay. Just want to make sure. Maybe you guys all understood that. I just want to make sure.
Okay. Ramesh reached out to me on the climate action portfolio. Aaron also wants to be primary on that. What I'll do is I'll reach out to you guys to coordinate how that'll work for the January 4th meeting. I know Ramesh is not on the call right now, but I'll reach out to Aaron. I'll reach out to you and Ramesh to coordinate how we handle January 4th. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, I think Ramesh and I can complement each other. I think you see my focus is on the resiliency side of the climate action.
Yeah.
He and I balance each other on that.
I'll just shoot you an email about just kind of coordinating agenda, time that you think you need, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Okay, good. Anything else? Okay, fantastic. Oh, we're running a little bit ahead of schedule. That's good. Okay, so moving to the next item. Jared wants to bring up Future IQ contract, so we can talk through that a little bit.
Yeah, so let me clarify some things. We've talked about this a couple times, about scenario planning, and based on the conversations we had around scenario planning, the staff went back to Future IQ and asked them to put a proposal together to take into consideration the information that we have in the 2040, kind of narrow in on the topics of smart city, and actually the Ford board as well has a proposal to do almost identical work for scenario planning. We as a staff did not budget in the current budget year to fund this work. So we as a board can make a formal recommendation to council to ask them to proceed with a contract with Future IQ to do this work. And what we'll do is do an amendment to the budget from undesignated fund balance to pay for this work. I put the full contract out there. If you guys haven't read through it, it's a pretty good scope of work for, in my opinion, not a lot of money. And it will provide us with an opportunity to work. The board will actually get to meet with David and have some focus groups and some discussions related to the work that he's going to be doing. So that's what this is. Like I said, I know we've talked about it, but we've not done a formal, any formal action on making this recommendation to council. Council does know that the Ford board has already made their recommendation. We're going to make our if we make a recommendation for approval to go forward with this tonight, I will take it to council tomorrow, and then we will actually get that work rolling pretty quickly. So,
Jared, I've got a couple questions here, if I can.
Sure.
So, looking at this document, it's dated August 21st.
mm-hmm.
I know we had talked about some of this stuff back in the late spring and early summer when we had our meetings. So
Correct.
Why is it taken from August until December to get this in front of us?
The proposal?
Yes, because you've now had it for, you would have had it when we had our September meeting. You would have had it when we had our October meeting. You would have had it when we had our November meeting.
Yes.
So it's 4 meetings in that you're now bringing this to us. I'm trying to understand why.
Well, so just to be honest with you, I didn't realize, and this is me being green to a board, I didn't realize that I would need your recommendation to take this before council. I was honestly going to go to the council with this proposal without the recommendation. It was then brought to my attention that, well, the board didn't officially do the process. So here we are. So
Okay.
I brought it before you.
So that's my first issue.
Okay.
And we really were only notified about it like a few days ago. I've looked through the proposal and the rest. So that's one thing. Second, I'm going to raise 2 objections to doing this.
Okay.
One, I know you say it's not much money. It's only $20,000. It's $20,000 during COVID. And I find it really hard to justify paying a consultant to come in on this at this point to do this. And so I'm going to put that objection out there. I really can't get behind that. So we have my timing concern, the 20,000, and then here's my third part, which is, given that we're dealing with the pandemic, it's really hard to have the consultant come in and interact with the public like we did when we did 2040. I mean, he can do virtual sessions with us, but we're still not getting any public input. I mean, other than that one question that came in during the citizens' appearance at the start of our meeting today, we have had no public attend any meeting of this. And I really am concerned that if we bring the consultant on at this point, it's just the wrong time. And I know we want to do this scenario planning, future visioning thing and the rest of it, and ask what that means to be a smart city. I just don't know that the timing is right, because when I go back and look at the proposal, the Gantt chart that's in there basically had them starting a scope of work in September. And now we're talking about doing a scope of work that's going to start in January. We still have the pandemic going on. I just don't know that this is the right time to do this. And I want to put that out there, and everybody can mull over it, but I want to make my position clear on this. I just don't know that, given timing, given cost, that this is really the right time to do this part. We can do a lot of the other stuff we've been talking about doing as a board without this input. And so I'm expressing a lot of skepticism here. I'm willing to be talked out of it. And I'm willing, if we decide to go forward with this and we do have the consultant participate, I'm willing to engage with the consultant and the rest of it, and the rest. But I just think it potentially, there's some optics to this we need to consider.
Hey, Jared,
Mm-hmm.
a couple of comments to piggyback on what Patrick is saying. We are talking about a planning process that goes through 2040. So if there was a delay due to timing concerns, we're not talking about a big impact to things that we're planning all the way out to 2040. The second thing I would say is that it sure would be nice to be past COVID concerns and be able to, do this with public input of the type that Future IQ drove in the last process, except this time with, everything that the board has produced thus far, and being able to get, public at the same meeting, if you will, be able to get public feedback on that material. That timing sure would be advantageous good, But I would add those two comments. I'm a believer that this is needed. I'm a believer that this is a really, really good deal. But with what Patrick is bringing up from a timing perspective, hey, he's right. You got a couple of things that would be a lot better if it were done a little bit later. Or let's say later, more like springtime or sometime when we think that COVID just might not be an issue.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, so really this is, at the end of the day, from my point of view, from the staff perspective, I believe that the cost is low for the work that we're going to get out. I do understand the concern related to getting the public input. I know that he can work with us virtually. Again, I just feel like almost from the very first meeting, we talked about where the 2040 stopped, and we wanted to continue on with that work. And so again, that's where this was headed. From a timing perspective, to your point, yeah, we could wait. There's no reason why we can't.
So Jared, if I can ask real quick, so what did the Ford, are they recommended to go forward and hire Future IQ to work with them?
Yes, and they actually asked for it. The irony is they asked for additional scope related to the focus groups. So their contract amount is $25K. They added another $5K to do additional focus group studies.
Right, but I don't see, this is my concern. I don't know how you do focus group studies with citizens right now. Logistically, COVID doesn't allow that. The other is, we had a family thing come up where we were trying to get a group of family together over the most recent holiday, and just trying to coordinate getting a regular family group coordinated on Zoom like we're all doing now was really, really hard to do. Right. Because you got some people who are using Zoom every day. You got some people who are using Teams every day, and they literally don't know how to follow the link and get on. So I don't know how do we engage with citizens, some of whom may not use English as a first language, right, or may have technology challenges, or don't have the same kind of high-speed internet all of us have, and allow them to properly participate. The one great thing about how we did everything for the 2040 planning was you guys did it. The city did a ton of meetings, right? You did stuff at North Lake, you did stuff at the library, you did stuff at the core, you did stuff at City Hall, and they were all times a day and the rest of it. And right now, we're already having trouble getting public input on this. And I want us to be in charge of this process, and I'm willing to take the consultant's input, but we also have to get the public input. We are a public board. We are, engaged in a public discussion and dialogue that is all open to the Texas Public Information Act.
Right. Yeah, and I don't disagree with that at all. I thought bringing on Future IQ would help us with that.
And maybe they've got some ways to facilitate that, but I didn't see it in. They're writing you a proposal during COVID. I didn't see anything in there that would go to that. Maybe what has to happen is you go back and ask about the scope of work and ask them to address kind of these things that Jeff and I are raising. Maybe they have some way to do this.
Yeah, and I can tell you, we did do Facebook Live 2040 studies and
right. I remember you did,
and we had lots of there were lots of opportunities. You're right. There were in person and online and surveys and every type of kind of way to get information. So yeah,
and Jared, I'm willing to be totally in the minority here. Like if Jeff wants to move this forward and we have a vote on it, I'm willing to be in the minority, and you can take it to council tomorrow and let council, they can go back over the discussion we've had here and the rest of it. I mean, it's council's choice at the end of the day. All we're doing is making a recommendation.
That's really it. I mean, if you guys aren't comfortable with making that recommendation today, then that's okay too. We can punt on it and come back and I can go back and get more information from them related to how they plan to address the focus groups. I mean, if that would be helpful.
Are there any ramifications to delay, if you will, Jared, that the board should know about?
The biggest, we would likely, because we did put Ford Board with the Ford Board's contract is together with the smart cities. We would probably we would delay them to January. But
they would presumably have the same sort of public input, issues, right?
But apparently they were comfortable because they did make the recommendation to go forward. So, I mean, it's like I said, it just from an agenda item perspective on the council agenda, they're tied together. So I'd have to confirm with the city secretary, but I think we'd pull the whole item since our half would not be, if you guys don't want to recommend that we go forward. So
I sure would like to have a mechanism that would solve the public input item for this board. And I think that would be a useful mechanism since Future IQ's gone through that process already.
I
guess I don't know if you want to have a vote here. If we did have a vote, I think I would vote with Patrick and say, I think there's some goodness that can come out of delaying.
I'm all ears. So however you guys, if you guys want to just wait, if any of the other board members would like to chime in, so we kind of have an idea of where you guys sit on this.
So how many boards are using Future IQ? Just Ford and Smart City?
Just Ford and Smart City, yes.
And
again, Future IQ was who did the 2040. And so the reason we're getting the value that we're getting on the contract is because he has all of the data from 2040 already in his pocket that he can leverage as he goes forward. So it's almost a continuation.
Right, but we have access to all that data too.
Yes.
So,
but if so, for example, I'll throw in, if we were to do an RFP for this work, I don't think we would find a vendor out there that would do it for this price.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I agree with the pricing. It's very attractive pricing. At the same time, I also agree with Patrick is just the timing is, I mean, how do you do this kind of studies in the middle of pandemic, right? I mean, public inputs are the hardest to get. I mean, any industry I've worked for the last 20 years, putting together a team in the same room is the best way to do these kind of studies. And virtual, I don't think it's going to do it. I could be wrong, right? So that's the pricing is great. The proposal, I reviewed it and it looks the timing wise is fine, but in the middle of a pandemic is just, I'm also on the same boat here is, maybe we want to ask them the question and see what they propose and maybe we want to delay it, so.
It'd be interesting to find out what kind of success they're having with other opportunities that they're working on. If they've had real good success and real good response, or whether what everybody's talking about is basically what's happening. I'm not sure if that will really come out in a discussion, if they'd really tell you that, but it'd be interesting to see that.
because I'm sure at this point they're doing everything 100% online. So, and I haven't asked the question on any other contract what their response rate is or any of those types of things. So, so that being said, what I'm hearing
Jared, you
is,
got answer, right?
yeah. So without, yeah, we will delay. And I guess, so now I'm gonna have to find out exactly how we'll handle the agenda item, but I'll get that taken care of. So what I'll say is we'll just at some point in the future bring it back up and we can continue the conversation and see if it is something we want to do as we go forward.
I mean, I would raise the same. I mean, not that I'm speaking for them, but I mean the other board that wants to contract and do this should have, you know, the same issue should be raised to them of how are you really going to get the feedback on this. That would be one thing I would tell you to, you know, take back to Mike Land and City Council out of this is I get the idea behind this and trying to do this for both boards and how it can be useful. I just timing wise, the social scientist in me says you're trying to do focus groups, you're trying to do surveys. That's all really hard right now. And I mean, I know people who do surveys, I know people who do focus groups, and it's just really, really hard to do right now with the pandemic. And so I just question whether you're going to get the right public input right now to do this thing the way you want to do it. Again, thinking 20 years out, as Jeff was raising earlier. You know, and it's one of those things where it may be waiting 6 months might really be the ideal sweet spot on this. You know, it may not even be 6 months. It could be 3 months. You know, we may be sitting here talking about this in March going, yeah, hey, things are going great. Let's go ahead and run this forward and start this process in March. I mean, but I just think right now, it just doesn't feel right to me to go this way, on it. You know, the other option, Jared, I wouldn't worry about this with respect to whatever's going to be on the council agenda, because technically, and this is a parliamentary thing, and I'm sure the city attorney can get on them about this, they could split what's there. If they have the thing there as a proposal, they could split it, cut one part off and say, we're not going to do the smart cities thing, but we're going to let the Ford have their thing and do it that way. And that's up to the city council to decide. And the rest, that's right. I wouldn't worry about that on your part.
Well, yeah. Well, but I gotta get that feedback to them before tomorrow. So.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. Noted. We'll move forward.
Okay. All right. That's the end of our agenda. Does anybody have anything they'd like to bring up? Does anybody have any, we'll get the agenda out as soon as possible so everybody can look that over. When we send the agenda out, whenever we do that, if anybody wants to reply to that and add agenda items, it's, you know, feel free to do that. That's perfectly okay. No one's got to accept the agenda as it looks. If you want to add something, please feel free to do that. We are at 8:10, a bit ahead of schedule. And we have a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Patrick moves to adjourn. Do we have a second?
I second it.
We have a second from Nancy. So we're going to adjourn the meeting at 8:10.
All in favor? Jeff, all in favor?
All in favor? Show of hands, please. Very good. Thank you. So we're adjourning.
Now we're officially adjourned.
Now we're officially adjourned. Thank you very much. And thanks everybody for participation tonight. Fantastic meeting. Thank you.
Good to see our new members.
Yeah. Thank you guys for coming on.
Have a great week.
Thanks for hanging out with us.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.